The Game Boy Advance. Not just one of the greatest handhelds of all time, but one of the greatest Nintendo platforms of all time, full stop. The GBA has an absolutely huge library packed to the rim with quality, so amongst all of these gems, it is fairly difficult to narrow it down to just 50 of the greatest games. However, this is my top 50 list, so it is simply about my top 50 favourite Game Boy Advance games. So sit back, relax and enjoy my ramblings about my 50 greatest GBA titles. Yeah! Mario Advance is an enhanced port of the remake of Super Mario Bros. 2, known as Super Mario Bros. USA in Japan, which was reskinned as Doki Doki Panic, which serves as part of the Mario All-Stars compilation on the Super Nintendo. Now that's a bloody mouthful to try and explain. This game has been remade and ported a lot over the years, however, the GBA version of this title is probably the best version of them all. The game served as a launch title for the system and was a very aesthetically pleasing game to witness debut on the handheld. It felt like a massive breath of fresh air from the simple 8-bit Game Boy. The game is a Western Mario All-Stars version of Super Mario Bros. 2, packed with even more content than before. There has been changes made to every level. There are now 5 red coins to collect in every stage, and there is even a new post-game mode where you have to find a hidden Yoshi egg on each stage. This game is so much more than just a lazy port. Rayman Advance is another title which was impressively ported over to the small screen in the very early days of the GBA. Rayman was one of the very best titles the Atari Jaguar had to offer back in the day, so once again it was amazing to play such a beautiful side-scrolling platformer on the go. The game is a lot of fun and such a colourful different sort of game to that of which we were getting on home consoles at the time, with their boring 50 Shades of Grey. Sonic, in my opinion, made an even more impressive debut on the GBA than that of Super Mario himself. Throughout the Game Boy Advance's life cycle, all of the Mario games were enhanced ports. Sonic on the other hand featured in an all-new adventure. Sonic Advance sees Sonic return to the realm of 2D side-scrolling, just like in his prime back in the Sega Mega Drive days. Once again the game looked stunning and was a massive change of pace from his clunky escapades in the Adventure series at home. Wade Hickston's Counterpunch is a fantastic love letter to the Punch-Out series. The game features a very similar style of gameplay and absolutely stunning aesthetics. Counterpunch often feels like you are playing an actual cartoon, rather than a simple handheld video game. The game is sometimes as tough as nails, but the art style and humour alone from me make this amongst the most underrated games on the whole platform. Mario Golf Advance Tour is a fun yet bizarre game. As rather than a golf game like you would expect, the game is a bloody fully blown JRPG with a story and a world to explore. However, instead of defeating monsters to gain experience points, your character must win rounds of golf to grow levels. Refreshingly, you do not play as a Mario character either. You pick between whether you want to play as a random boy or girl as you go on your quest to become the next Tiger Woods. Truly bizarre really, and not the game you would expect by simply looking at the box art. I love these odd Mario sports RPGs though, they are a great breath of fresh air. Gunstar Future Heroes, known as Gunstar Super Heroes outside of Europe, is a fully blown sequel to the cult classic known as Gunstar Heroes on the Mega Drive. Treasure are back with a game which may as well have been called Gunstar Heroes 2, and the game features a very similar playstyle to the original. You could make a case for this game being just as good as its famous predecessor. However, fortunately for game collectors, this title is available at a fraction of the cost, another amazing hidden gem in the system's library. The Megaman Zero series is the sequel to the Mega Man X series and is set about a century after these events. Megaman Zero is a two-dimensional action platform game with run and gun elements that places a heavy emphasis on memorising boss patterns and selecting the correct weapons to use against enemies. The game differs from Mega Man X games in that all the levels serve as part of a larger world, and you can freely explore these areas once the respective missions in each area are completed. Like Gunstar Super Heroes, Mega Man Zero does not seem to get talked about on the same level as Mega Man X, and I would really only put that down to handheld bias. Mario Kart Super Circuit may personally be my favourite Mario Kart game in the whole series. The game features a huge amount of content and was all around much bigger than what we got on the Super Nintendo and the Nintendo 64 before it. The game includes 40 different racetracks, which was a record for the franchise, and even featured returns of tracks for the first time from older titles too. This gave me a huge wave of nostalgia at the time, and was one of the first new games I can recall which celebrated and reinvented content from the 16-bit era of gaming. This game has so much stuff to achieve included, that to this day I have never successfully managed to complete the whole game, whereas I managed to complete Mario Kart Double Dash on the GameCube in just the first week. Speaking of the 16-bit era, The Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past, was ported from the Super Nintendo to the GBA. The game is argued by many to be the greatest game in the Super Nintendo's library, and the version on the Game Boy Advance's hardware plays just as fantastically as the original. The game also came packed with 4 Swords Adventure, the first multiplayer Zelda experience. Another game that was finally ported over to the system was Final Fantasy VI. As a European, we never had any of the main series Final Fantasy titles released in the region until Final Fantasy VII. So, Final Fantasy VI on the Game Boy Advance was my first personal playthrough of the game, and my god was it bloody good. Final Fantasy VI is easily one of the greatest JRPGs ever made, and the ability to play it on the go makes this version of the game just that little bit more sweeter. Alien Hominid is a run-and-gun side-scroller with one of the most unique art styles on the platform. If, back in the day, like myself, you used to browse Newgrounds.com, you would know this art style well, as Alien Hominid is from the creators of Newgrounds. The game is a lot of fun to play, but it is even better to just admire how different this game looks to most other titles. The game stands out to this day, just as much as it did on release. The first Castlevania game on the Game Boy Advance was Circle of the Moon, which sees the return of the Metroidvania style, which was successfully implemented as well in this game as it was in Symphony of the Night on the Sony PlayStation. The game is long and challenging, and was quoted by reviewers at the time to be Konami's second symphony. The game's flaws has always been the amount of lighting in the game, but with modern front-lit screens, this criticism is no longer an issue, so the game is even better today than it was on release. Bubble Bobble Old and New features the original arcade version of Bubble Bobble, along with a remake of the game with a fresh coat of paint. This version of the game is a fantastic way of experiencing this classic on the go, with 2 different art styles to choose from depending on your gaming taste. I was a fan of playing this game in the arcades as a child, and love the game just as much today. Kuru Kururin is an old game where you play as a duck thing who pilots a helicopter sort of thing. In this game you must try your best to fly through courses whilst not clipping your wings on the walls around the edges. The game is both fun, challenging and frustrating, all in equal measures, and is once again one of the most unique games amongst the Game Boy Advance's system library. Mario Advance 2 is a port of Super Mario World, my personal favourite 2D side-scrolling Mario game of all time. The GBA version of this game is as great as ever, however I was slightly disappointed with this game's lack of new features in comparison to that of what we got with the first Mario Advance port. If you stick the name Advance in a game's title, you kind of expected an advanced experience really. As much as I complain about this though, this game is still Super Mario World, and this was the first time we could experience this classic on a small screen. Advanced Guardian Heroes is the sequel to Guardian Heroes on the Sega Saturn of all things. This is certainly a game I would imagine most would overlook, especially when you consider many people never even got round to trying out the fantastic Saturn title. The game received lackluster reviews at the time, however I completely disagree with them, as I have always had nothing but fun with this title. The game is a great side-scrolling beat-em-up with role-playing game elements. If you're yet to try this one out, make sure you give it a go. Pokemon Emerald is a slightly enhanced version of Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, the 3rd generation of Pokemon games. Like with every main entry Pokemon game, the game is an all-time classic and an addictive experience which consists of trying to win battles and collecting Pokemon. I felt like these titles were a massive step down from Gold and Silver though, as you could no longer trade your Pokemon over from previous generations, and the world was much smaller with only 8 gyms to conquer as opposed to 16. Ruby and Sapphire was a huge step in the wrong direction for the franchise, and the game sold comparatively poorly as a result. Ruby and Sapphire never even featured a full Pokédex, so it was not even possible to catch them all. Emerald tried its best to fix some of these problems, for example reintroducing the full Pokédex, which came in use when trading with the new Pokemon from Fire Red and Leaf Green games. Overall, the third generation Pokemon games are the most flawed I have ever experienced, but then again, they are only the worst games in one of the greatest handheld series of all time. So, despite my moaning, they are fantastic games if you ignore all the other better entries in the series, hence why it is still on this list. Advance Wars was a revelation for me at the time. It was like playing chess on steroids. This tactical role-playing war game is hugely addictive, and it becomes very easy to lose hours to this game very quickly. In this game, you move your pieces, which each feature various functions in order to destroy your opponent's pieces and capture their base. If I made a top 10 handheld games of all time list, I would have to include an entry from this fantastic series of games. Metroid Fusion is a full-blown Metroid game, and the first of its kind since Super Metroid on the Super Nintendo, another title in which many people hail as the greatest Super Nintendo game of all time. Personally, I think Metroid Fusion is an even greater game than that of its Super Nintendo counterpart, as the game just feels all around more intuitive, and all the controls in this one actually work. Super Metroid always wound me up a little bit for just how bad and hard it was to use the wall jump. Actually, no complaints like this from me with this one though. Metroid Fusion is my all-time favourite Metroid game. WiiWare Land 4 is a beautiful side-scrolling platform game which is graphically a massive step up from the WiiWare Land entries on the Game Boy Color. This is a fun, stunning 32-bit side-scroller that mostly focuses around looking for treasure throughout the game's variety of great levels. We may have not got a new Super Mario Bros. Game on either the Game Boy Color or Advance for some reason, but at least Wario had our back. I love Wario, he is such a lovely man. Astro Boy is yet another game by Treasure for the GBA. This game's quality absolutely blew me away, and the game kind of feels like the Sega Mega Drive classic that never was. The game is an absolutely amazing run and gun game which plays even better than the majority of Mega Man titles. It is quite amazing to see really that Mega Man was based on Astro Boy in the first place, to see Astro Boy make a comeback and actually beat the Blue Bomber at his own game. Seriously though, this game is special and a must play for all. Golden Sun is a great little RPG brought to the Game Boy Advance by Camelot. This stunning game features great graphics, unique battle mechanics and good music to tie it all together. This was a fantastic early release on the platform and a game worth playing for any JRPG fetishist out there in the world. WarioWare Inc. was one of the most unique games I have ever experienced on release. The game consists of completing various 3-second long back-to-back micro games, which in turn makes this all a bizarre yet pleasurable experience. Like Pokemon and Advance Wars, this too is one of the most addictive games I have ever played. My favourite feature in the game though was the retro-inspired micro games. WarioWare Inc. was pushing the retro gaming nostalgia narrative before the word retro gaming even existed. A truly special game. Sonic Advance 2 offers much of the same sort of experience as the first Sonic Advance game. However, I would say the second entry probably has the edge in terms of level design. The game also introduces the playable character known as Cream, which to be fair is one of the better modern character designs in Sonic's hugely oversaturated universe. Sonic Advance 2 was the first entry I experienced in the Advance series, and personally I loved every minute of it. Pokemon Pinball, Ruby and Sapphire is the direct sequel to the Pokemon Pinball game on the Game Boy Color, and plays in much of the same ways too. This pinball title is extremely addictive, as rather than just going after high scores like in most pinball games, in this game you must hatch, capture and evolve Pokemon along the way too, overall trying to complete your Pokédex. The game features fun bonus stages as well to further change up the gameplay. This game looks very simple on the surface, however once again this is one of the more addictive games on the platform. F-Zero Maximum Velocity was the first F-Zero game to feature on the GBA platform and is a fast-paced, decent racing game much like its predecessors. If you want to play an F-Zero game on the GBA platform, this is the best offering of the 3 titles available. The game is not quite Mario Kart Super Circuit, but it is good fun nonetheless. Kirby's Nightmare in Dreamland is a 32-bit remake of Kirby's Adventure for the NES, probably the most impressive game that was available on the whole NES system. This is a fun platforming experience which was great to get in portable form, especially with the fantastic new coat of paint. In this game, Kirby can inhale various enemies so that he can steal their powers and use them for himself. A wonderful little game. Castlevania Harmony of Dissonance is the second GBA Castlevania game, which once again retains the Metroidvania gameplay style. The game features an array of more side-scrolling goodness. This is all if you can overlook the horrible music the game has. As grating as the music is in this game though, the gameplay shines through as another fun Castlevania affair. Fire Emblem, the Blazing Blade, is simply known as Fire Emblem outside of Japan, as this was the first Fire Emblem game to be released outside of the country. This game was released due to characters' newfound popularity in the GameCube game Super Smash Bros. This game functions in a similar fashion to Advance Wars, as this is another tactical role-playing series by Intelligent Systems. Personally, I prefer the Advance Wars games on the GBA, but Fire Emblem puts a different twist on an incredible genre. Advance Wars 2 Black Hole Rising ramps everything up from its previous entry. The game offers much the same experience, although the game features more characters, a longer and more interesting story, and more importantly, the War Room. The War Room is extremely pick up and play, meaning that experienced players like myself can choose something challenging to do right from the off. Black Hole Rising is one of the greatest tactical role-playing games ever. Mario Tennis Power Tour functions in the same way as the Mario Golf game does on the GBA. This is another crazy sports role-playing game where you play as a random young protagonist who wants to make his way up to the top of the tennis world. Personally, I prefer this game over the golf one, but that could just be because I prefer the tennis game over golf in general. But different strokes for different folks. What you talking about, Willis? Sword of Mana is an enhanced remake of Seiken Densetsu for the Game Boy, known as Final Fantasy Adventure in North America and Mystic Quest in Europe. The game has been completely remade from the ground up, in the stunning graphical style of Secret of Mana on the Super Nintendo. This is a fun, impressive looking game, and both this game and the Game Boy original both have their own merits. I would say try them both out if you're into your action RPGs. Klonoa Empire of Dreams is a sequel to Klonoa Moonlight Museum for Gunpei Yokoi's Bandai WonderSwan platform. This is a fun side-scrolling platforming game which features the same control mechanics as the Klonoa game on the PS1, where you must grab enemies to then use them to throw or jump to previously unreachable areas, a somewhat fun, underrated gem. Megaman Zero 2 features much of the same tropes from the previous Megaman Zero game, and is yet another fine entry within this great run and gun series. It is also of note that all 4 Megaman Zero games were later released on a compilation cartridge for the Nintendo DS, so there is a cheap, affordable way to experience all of these quality games when you are out and about on the go. Mario Advance 3 is a re-release of Yoshi's Island Super Mario World 2 for the Super Nintendo. Yoshi's Island is an excellent game and a fantastic addition to the GBA's already stellar library. However, once again it was slightly sad to see a lack of new and advanced features. This game is even closer to a straightforward copy and paste job than either of the previous Mario Advance titles. Still though, this is a Yoshi's Island game on the go, which was wonderful at the time and still is. Metal Slug Advance's gameplay is very similar to any other Metal Slug game, but with 2 new systems, the life system and the card system. The system is simply a life bar for the players, and it replaces the extra lives from all of the other Metal Slug games. This game offers the usual high quality Metal Slug run and gun experience, but on the GBA for the very first time. Pokemon Leaf Green and Fire Red are remakes of the original Pokemon games for the Game Boy. I was extremely pleased to see these games released at the time after my complete disappointment with Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire versions. All of the original Pokemon were back, you know, the ones you actually liked. The game was an enhanced remake of the original, however it offered an all-new post-game experience where you could travel from island to island discovering Pokemon from the Gold and Silver universe. Apart from that, you could trade over Pokemon from Ruby and Sapphire, so you could try and collect all 386 Pokemon for the first time ever. Metroid Zero Mission is another enhanced remake, this time of the original Metroid game of the NES. The Game Boy Advance overall did a fantastic job of bringing to the table many enhanced versions of titles from gaming's past. The game retells the story of the original, but with Metroid Fusion-esque gameplay. The game is short, but the addition of new content makes this game overall worth a play. Mario vs Donkey Kong is the sequel to Donkey Kong released on the Game Boy in 1994. This game features a similar playstyle where you play as Mario, collecting keys to get through doors and completing many stages. Overall, a very fun little title. WiiWare Twisted is another Wario game full of micro game madness. This late GBA release features built-in technology in the cartridge so that you can play the game via tilting the GBA. This was the same sort of technology that would later go on to be used in the Wiimotes, so this was the first and only GBA title to feature motion control. The microgames in this title are a lot of fun and one of the few games that has to be experienced using original hardware rather than emulation. The Legend of Zelda, the Minish Cap, is another late GBA release, and is the only GBA Zelda exclusive. The game is played from a top-down perspective, much like Link's the Past. The main gimmick of this title was that Link could shrink down to the size of an ant, so that he could explore new undiscovered worlds. The game is good fun, but much shorter than a lot of other big Zelda games. Overall though, it is 100% worth a playthrough. Sonic Advance 3 is the third instalment in the Sonic Advance trilogy, and once again offers much as the same as the others. This is a decent platforming affair, and no matter which game you pick out of the three, you're going to get a decent Sonic experience overall. Fire Emblem, The Sacred Stones, is once again yet another decent tactical role-playing game amongst the GBA's deep library. In this game you take the role of royal siblings Erika and Ephraim during separate campaigns as they fight hostile forces invading their homeland, along with allies acquired on your journey. This is another intelligent system game worth trying out. Castlevania, Aria of Sorrow is the third Metroidvania-style Castlevania game released on the Game Boy Advance. The storyline of this game is extremely odd, as it is a game about Count Dracula set in Japan in the year 2035. But if you could ignore how horrible the anime storytelling is in this game, there is a fun gameplay experience to be had underneath it all. Golden Sun: The Lost Age gives you an experience very similar to the first game in the series. This is because the two titles were originally intended to be one game, but had to be split up due to the Game Boy Advance's hardware limitations. So if you had fun playing the first Golden Sun game, you need to play through this one as well, really, in order to get the whole Golden Sun experience. Mario Advance 4 is a port of the Super Mario All-Stars version of Super Mario Bros. 3. As a European, I just always made the assumption that this game was the laziest port yet, as it appeared to be just Super Mario Bros. 3, which is a great game nonetheless. However, apparently the rest of the world outside of Europe got an e-card reader, which allowed you to unlock all new levels for this title. I guess I'm going to have to source a copy of this game from a different region down the line to experience this. Megaman Zero 3 offers more run and gun Mega Man greatness, just like all of the other Megaman Zero games within the franchise. As I have mentioned already, I have no idea why this series does not receive more praise. My only assumption is the fact that it appeared on a handheld in an era where 2D gaming was not particularly fashionable in the first place. Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga is a full-blown JRPG packed to the top with zany humour and tantalising gameplay, story and battle mechanics. Out of the many Mario JRPGs that have been made over the years, this title stands out as certainly one of the better offerings. But then again, this was still within the time frame where Mario JRPGs could do no wrong. As good as the Mario and Luigi series is, none of the game's sequels have quite matched the magic of this one. It really is something quite special, really. Final Fantasy IV is, well, Final Fantasy IV, a game we missed out on in Europe during its prime. The Game Boy Advance allowed many of us to experience this game for the first time, and equally and as importantly, it let us play this grindy game on the go. I think it is a toss-up out of Final Fantasy IV and VI regarding which one is better. However, both games have their own merits and credentials, contributing to both of them being amongst the best games the genre has ever offered. Mother 3 is the infamous Japan exclusive sequel to Earthbound, a game now that Nintendo fanboys have been screeching to see released worldwide for quite some time. Personally though, I do not give a crap if they ever release it, as the fan translated version does the job perfectly fine on its own. The game is an emotional roller coaster, filled with fun, humour, happiness and sadness alike. This is a game that attempts to touch on all of your emotions, overall contributing to one of the most engaging playthrough experiences I have ever had. The game is all around leaps and bounds ahead of Earthbound, and arguably the greatest Game Boy Advance game of all time. So ladies and gentlemen, that was my top 50 favourite Game Boy Advance games. Let me know in the comment section what some of yours are, and which games I missed out on, which you would have liked to have seen me include within this list. If you enjoyed this video, there are plenty of top 50s on my channel you can check out, plus a range of engaging documentaries I've produced on various games and systems. Do not forget to like this video and hit the subscribe button, and if you really want to help me out, you can hit the notification bell too. I am motivated to go to such lengths to create this sort of content partially due to the fantastic support I receive on Patreon. You people are one of the main reasons I go to such lengths to try to create such depthy content. So shout outs to Carl Johnson, Shizuka Kobayashi, Andy Aldridge, Richard Clark, Michael Keneally, Greg Hooper, Harold Webb, Sint Spaces, Kevin Verhaley, David Mountford, Andrew Bazansky, Edward O'Reilly, Peter Dawn, Tom Elliott, Mark S. Hines, Gary Pinkett, The Gaming Muso, and all of my other patrons. You people help me out to no end. I love you so much. Yeah. Cheerio!